Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're plunging into the world of business and work life in the UK. We've gathered a really interesting set of information for you, from the nuts and bolts of their economy, right through to the subtle cues of social etiquette.
Yeah.
In a professional context, think of this as your shortcut, really, to getting a solid handle on doing business and working in the United Kingdom.
Exactly. We've pulled together economic data, a snapshot of the typical workday, the essentials of their labor laws,
Right.
an intro to some key organizations shaping the work environment, an overview of Brexit and, well, its implications,
Of course.
and a guide to British business culture and etiquette. It's quite a comprehensive look, actually.
It really is. And our goal today is, well, to extract the most important and hopefully fascinating insights from all of this. We want to give you a clear, concise, and engaging understanding of what it's like to navigate the UK's business world. Whether you're thinking about working there, collaborating with British companies, or maybe you're just curious about how it all fits together.
Makes sense.
Okay, let's unpack this, starting with the foundation, the UK economy. Let's see it through them.
Right. So the UK holds a pretty significant position on the global economic stage. In 2023, its nominal GDP reached $3.159 trillion.
Wow.
Yeah, making it the sixth largest worldwide. Now, when we look at purchasing power parity, or PPP,
Which gives a better sense of relative cost of living, right?
exactly, yeah,
Yep.
it adjusts for that. The figure is $3.847 trillion, placing it 10th globally.
So still top 10 by that measure. Those are some big numbers.
Yeah.
What about recent performance and the outlook?
Well, after a pretty strong growth of 4.1% in 2022, forecasts indicated a slight dip, -0.3% expected for 2023, but then followed by a projected rebound of about 1.0% in 2024. So it's a picture of, recent strength, then a minor contraction, and then hopefully a return to growth.
And how does that translate down to the individual level? What's the GDP per capita like?
Good question. In 2023, the nominal GDP per capita was around $46,371.
Right.
That ranks them 22nd globally. Now, when we adjust for that purchasing power parity, it rises to $56,471, putting them in 26th place. So it suggests that while the UK has a large overall economy, the economic output per person is also, pretty substantial internationally.
Right. Okay. So we have an idea of the size, the individual prosperity. Now let's look at the structure. Where does the UK's economic activity mainly lie?
Well, the breakdown from 2017 really highlights a very strong service-based economy.
No.
Agriculture contributes just 0.7%. Industry accounts for about 20.2%.
Right.
And a huge 79.2% comes from services.
89%.
Yeah, that covers, everything from finance and retail to tourism, technology. It's broad. And it's interesting, more recent data on the labor force, I think from 2011, kind of aligns with this. It showed nearly 80% of the workforce employed in services back then, too.
That's a really dominant service sector. I wonder, though, with such a large chunk in services, how reliant is the UK on, say, global trends in finance or tech? Does that create potential vulnerabilities?
Oh, that's a crucial question. Absolutely. A heavy reliance on services, particularly financial services, does make the UK susceptible to global economic shifts and the performance of international markets. And, changes in technology also have a massive impact on this sector. It needs constant adaptation, innovation.
Makes sense. Okay, let's drill down into some specific indicators. What are some key metrics we should be aware of?
Certainly. So as of March 2023, inflation, measured by the CPI, the Consumer Price Index, was at 10.1%.
Oof, quite high.
It was, yeah. Unemployment in February 2023 stood at 3.8%, which is relatively low, generally speaking. However, it's worth noting, youth unemployment. The latest figure we had from the source was May 2020, and it was 14.7%.
Yeah.
So that indicates potentially a challenge for younger workers entering the job market, or at least it did then.
Right.
The average gross weekly salary in November 2022 was £640.
Okay.
And finally, the Gini coefficient that measures income inequality.
Right. 0 is perfect equality, 100 perfect inequality.
Exactly. It was 33.5 in 2018. A score like 33.5 suggests, a moderate level of income inequality compared to some other developed nations. Still, it's a figure policymakers watch closely.
So, okay, generally healthy employment overall, but alongside notable inflation and that moderate income inequality, what about the UK's role in international trade?
Well, the UK is a significant player. It ranks as the fifth largest exporter and also the fifth largest importer globally.
Wow, fifth both ways.
Yeah, it really underscores its interconnectedness with the global economy.
And I imagine a big chunk of that trade involves their closest neighbors.
Absolutely. In 2020, trade with the European Union accounted for a considerable 49% of the UK's exports.
Almost half.
And 52% of its imports. So yeah, despite Brexit, the EU remains absolutely vital as a trading partner.
Good point. Just to make sure we're clear on terms, could you briefly explain the difference between nominal and real GDP? They come up a lot.
Sure, yeah, happy to. So nominal GDP is basically the total value of all goods and services produced in a country in a specific year.
Okay.
Using the current market prices for those goods and services. It's the kind of raw total.
Got it.
Real GDP, on the other hand, adjusts that figure for the effects of inflation.
Okay.
It measures the actual volume of goods and services produced, so it gives a more accurate picture of economic growth over time because it removes the distortion caused by rising prices.
So nominal is today's prices, real is adjusted to see the actual change in stuff produced.
Exactly. Think of nominal as value in today's pounds, and real as value adjusted to a base year to show the true change in output.
That's really helpful. Okay, let's move from the big economic picture to the more personal experience of working in the UK. What does a typical working day or week look like for most people?
Generally, the standard workday in the UK tends to run from about 9 a.m. to 5 p.m.
Okay.
Monday through Friday, so that sets up a typical 5-day work week for many people.
Sounds fairly standard, but I have heard, actually, that the British tend to work longer hours on average compared to some of their European neighbors. Is that right?
It is, yes. It's quite interesting, actually. The UK has one of the longer average working weeks in Europe. It clocks in at around 42.3 hours.
42.3.
Yeah. And just for context, the average across the EU is about 40.3 hours. And countries like, say, the Netherlands average around 39 hours. Norway's about 38.5. So, yeah, noticeably longer in the UK.
That is surprising. It sort of challenges the image one might have.
It does. And what's also interesting is that this longer average doesn't always translate directly into higher productivity per hour when you compare internationally. So it does raise questions about, work-life balance and maybe the effectiveness of those extra hours.
Yeah, that's fascinating. So even to the 9-to-5 framework, those extra hours do add up. What about breaks during the day and the attitude towards overtime?
Lunch breaks are usually an hour, often less. And it's quite common for people to work beyond 5 p.m., put in overtime during the week.
Right.
The standard retirement age is 65. And it's also worth mentioning that the statutory annual holiday entitlement in the UK is comparatively shorter than in some other European nations.
Interesting. Longer work week, relatively shorter holidays. Paints a bit of a different picture. Okay, let's shift to the legal side. What are some key aspects of British labor laws that are important to know?
Well, one fundamental aspect is paid holidays. UK law mandates a minimum of 24 days of paid leave per year for workers.
24 days minimum.
Okay, that's the legal floor. Many employers do offer more generous holiday packages, of course.
Right. What about the minimum wage? That's off as a hot topic.
Absolutely. The national minimum wage in the UK is reviewed annually. And a key feature is that it varies based on the age of the employee.
Age-related. How does that work?
So looking at the rates from 2018-19, for example, the minimum wage for those aged 25 and over was £7.83 per hour, and there was a planned increase to £8.21 in April 2019.
Okay.
But then there were different rates for younger groups. 21 to 24-year-olds had a minimum of £7.38, planned to increase to £7.70. 18 to 20-year-olds were at £5.90, rising to £6.15, and those under 18 had a minimum of £4.20, going up to £4.35.
Right.
So age is a really significant factor in the minimum legal pay.
It is interesting how tiered that is. Now, something that might surprise some listeners is the legislation around child labor. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, it might raise a few eyebrows. In the UK, children can legally work from the age of 13.
Really? What?
Yeah, but there are quite specific regulations about their working hours, mainly to ensure it doesn't interfere with their education and well-being.
Okay, so there are restrictions.
Oh, yes, definitely. For children under 15, they can work a maximum of 5 hours on Saturdays and weekdays during summer holidays,
Right.
with a total limit of 25 hours per week during all school holidays. On school days and Sundays, their working hours are limited to just 2 hours maximum.
Okay.
For those over 15, the restrictions are a bit less stringent. They can work up to 8 hours on Saturdays and school holiday weekdays, with a weekly maximum of 35 hours during holidays.
That's quite detailed. Shows a clear effort to balance work and school. Lastly, on labor laws, what about public holidays? How many do people typically get off?
Right. The main public holidays observed across the whole UK include Christmas Day and Boxing Day.
December 25th, 26th.
Correct. Easter, though the dates vary, March or April usually, and New Year's Day, January 1st.
Standard ones.
Pretty much. But what's a curious point is that the number of bank holidays, as they're often called, actually differs slightly across the 4 nations of the UK.
Oh, really?
Yeah. England and Wales typically have 8, Scotland usually has 9, and Northern Ireland gets 10.
Huh. That's an interesting regional difference. Okay, we've covered the legal framework. Now, who are some of the key organizations that play significant roles in the UK's employment and business sectors?
There are several important organizations, kind of key voices. Firstly, we have the Trades Union Congress, or TUC.
TUC.
Founded way back in 1868. The TUC is the National Trade Union Center. It represents the majority of trade unions in the UK.
Okay.
Its main aims are to support trade unions in, well, growing their membership and effectiveness, help them represent their members well, and basically ensure that the voices of working people are heard as the world of work changes. The current general secretary is Paul Nowak.
And they advocate for workers' rights too, presumably.
Oh, absolutely. That's a vital role. Research, policy development, campaigning for changes in laws and attitudes.
Got it. So they're the primary advocate for employees. Who represents the interests of employers?
That would primarily be the Confederation of British Industry, or CBI.
CBI.
Established in 1965, the CBI is a leading business organization in the UK. It represents businesses across various sectors of private industry. Its main goal is to promote a thriving business environment. It does this by actively lobbying and advising the government on policies that affect businesses.
Right.
And it also provides a platform for networking and collaboration among its members.
Okay. TUC for employees, CBI for businesses. And our sources also mention the National Farmers Union.
Yes, the NFU. That's the largest organization representing farmers and growers in England and Wales. Founded in 1908.
Long history there, too.
It does. And it has a significant local presence, over 300 branch offices, apparently. The NFU's main job is to represent its members' interests by negotiating with the government and other national bodies on issues affecting agriculture. They also work hard to raise public awareness about the importance of British farming. You might have seen their Back British Farming campaign.
Ah, yes, I think I have.
That highlights the economic, social, and environmental contributions of the sector.
Okay, so key groups for employees, businesses, and a crucial sector like farming. That gives a good overview of the organized landscape. Now let's dig into a major event that has significantly reshaped the UK's business environment. Brexit. Can you give us a concise explanation? What is it, and what were the key factors leading up to it?
Certainly. So Brexit is simply a portmanteau, a blend of British and exit.
Right.
It just refers to the United Kingdom's departure from the European Union. The UK originally joined the EU, or the EEC as it was then, back in 1973.
Okay.
Then, on June 23, 2016, the UK held a national referendum. The public voted on whether the country should remain a member of or leave the EU.
And the result?
The result was 17.4 million people voting to leave, while 16.1 million voted to remain.
Very close. A huge decision. According to our sources, what were some of the main reasons behind that push to leave?
Well, according to the perspective outlined by the then Prime Minister David Cameron, there were 2 main areas of concern regarding UK membership that really fueled the Leave campaign. Firstly, there was the potential for the UK to be obligated to adopt the euro as its currency, which was viewed by some as perhaps a weaker and less stable currency, especially looking at the economic problems faced by some Eurozone countries like Greece at the time. Secondly, there were significant concerns about the EU's influence on the UK's immigration policies.
That was a big one in the debates, wasn't it?
It really was. Specifically, the EU's principle of free movement, granting EU citizens the right to live and work in any member state and access employment benefits, was a major point of contention.
Right.
Proposals by the UK government to, say, restrict access to in-work benefits or social housing for EU immigrants even after 4 years of contribution were directly opposed by the EU Commission.
So issues around sovereignty over currency and control over immigration were key drivers. Were there other sort of underlying factors?
Yes, absolutely. A broader concern for many in Britain was the perceived overreach of the EU and its impact on British sovereignty.
Sovereignty, yeah.
Some argued the EU held too much influence over UK laws and regulations, and that UK policymakers had lost control over important areas like trade, human rights, migration.
Oh.
And furthermore, the nature of EU law itself as supranational law, meaning that where laws conflict, EU law takes precedence over national law.
Right.
That was a key concern for anti-EU activists. They felt these EU regulations ultimately undermined British national interests.
It certainly sounds like a complex mix of political and economic factors that led to that leave vote.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift gears now to something equally crucial for anyone interacting with the UK, British business culture. What are some fundamental facts to keep in mind?
Okay, some basics to start. The UK population is approximately 63 million people. It operates on Greenwich Mean Time, GMT, or British Summer Time, BST, depending on the season, which is generally Central European Time minus 1 hour.
Got it.
Capital city is London. Official currency is the British pound sterling, the pound sign on it, and the primary language, of course, is English.
Straightforward enough. Now let's get into the more nuanced stuff. The unwritten rules, the social graces, potential pitfalls, taboos and manners. What are some key do's and don'ts?
Right, this is important. For greetings, a polite handshake is standard practice. It's generally best to avoid hugging or kissing people you're meeting for the first time.
Okay, handshake it is.
In terms of public behavior, queuing is very important. Always stand in line, wait your turn.
Don't jump the queue.
Definitely not. Men typically remove their hats when indoors. Politeness is highly valued, so using excuse me, please, and thank you consistently is essential.
Good manners are key.
Very much so. Avoid speaking loudly in public places, and staring at others is considered impolite.
Right.
When dining, don't speak with your mouth full, never eat directly off a knife,
Right.
Cover your mouth when coughing or sneezing, and avoid burping or spitting in public. That's a definite no-no.
Okay, basic good table manners mostly.
Pretty much. On a more personal level, it's best to avoid asking very personal or intimate questions, particularly when you first meet someone. And definitely avoid asking a woman her age.
Noted.
Finally, gestures like sort of backslapping or overly familiar physical contact are generally not the norm in initial interactions. And remember, always be punctual, offer a smile, and say sorry. Brits tend to apologize quite a lot, even for minor things.
Yes, the famous British apology. That's a really helpful rundown of potential social landmines. What about the specifics of business communication? How do things typically work in a professional setting?
Okay, so for initial business meetings, it's often beneficial if you can be introduced by a mutual contact or a third party.
Right, a warm intro helps.
It does. While a handshake might happen, it's usually just for the very first meeting. When starting a conversation, it's wise to begin with neutral topics, the weather, travel, something light to build rapport before diving straight into business.
Okay, small talk first.
Yes, and also be mindful of the British tendency towards understatement.
Understatement. How so?
Well, they might not express things in the most direct or forceful way. Something described as quite good might actually mean very good. Not bad could mean excellent. You have to listen carefully sometimes.
Okay. Read between the lines a bit. Noted.
Mm-hmm.
What about ongoing communication? Any particular nuances there?
Well, when communicating, don't be too surprised or take offense if you hear informal terms like love, mate, chap, or even pet, especially in more casual exchanges or perhaps outside major cities.
Okay.
But it's generally best for you to avoid overly expressive gestures or prolonged, intense eye contact. That can sometimes be seen as a bit intrusive or uncomfortable.
Right.
Regarding personal titles, using first names is very common in most day-to-day business conversations once you've been introduced. However, in more formal settings or maybe an initial written correspondence with someone you don't know well, it's appropriate to use social titles like Mr., Mrs., Doctor, etc. And if you're addressing a woman and you're unsure of her marital status, MEMS, MS, is the generally accepted and safest option.
It's valuable guidance. What about when it comes to actually, finalizing deals and building those business relationships?
Business relationships in the UK are typically formalized with a written and witnessed contract.
The contract is key.
Absolutely. And these documents often get reviewed carefully by legal professionals. trust, reliability, and a sense of fairness are really highly valued in British business dealings. And interestingly, there's a growing trend, apparently, towards flatter organizational hierarchies in UK companies compared to maybe more traditional structures.
Flatter hierarchies, okay? So the formal agreement carries significant weight. Finally, any specific points on business etiquette we should be especially mindful of?
Yes, a few things. Punctuality, as mentioned with manners, is crucial for business meetings too. Arrive on time.
On time means on time.
Pretty much. Being a few minutes late, say up to 5, might be okay sometimes, but if you anticipate being 10 minutes late or more, it's really good practice to call ahead and let them know. If you're going to be more than 15 minutes late without letting them know, you might even need to think about rescheduling. It's taken quite seriously.
Okay, punctuality is paramount. What about gifts?
Gift giving is not a usual part of British business etiquette. It's not really expected.
Okay.
If a gift is offered, perhaps by someone visiting from a culture where it is common, it should be modest. Think company-related items like branded pens, notebooks, maybe a book, a diary, or a small, tasteful souvenir from your home country.
Nothing too lavish.
Exactly. It's essential to avoid anything that could possibly be interpreted as a bribe or an attempt to unduly influence a decision. Keep it small and symbolic.
Got it. And lastly, dress code.
Generally, classical conservative attire is the norm for both men and women in most professional settings in the UK. Think suits, smart dresses, shirts.
So fairly formal.
Often, yes. Denim is usually not considered appropriate for formal business environments. But of course, dress codes can vary depending on the specific industry. Tech might be more casual than finance, for example, and the individual company culture. When in doubt, it's probably safer to err on the side of slightly more formal.
Good advice. That's all incredibly insightful info for anyone looking to engage with the UK business world. And we even had a brief mention earlier about work placements.
Ah, yes. Just noted they are very popular. Lots of information available from universities and businesses, and they're mostly paid opportunities for students.
A common way to get experience.
Precisely. A common pathway for young people moving into the workforce.
Well, this has truly been a deep dive into the intricacies of the UK's business and work culture. Let's try and quickly recap some key takeaways for our listeners.
That sounds good.
Okay, so we've seen the UK has a major global economy, number 6 nominally, heavily weighted towards that huge service sector.
Nearly 80%.
While also navigating challenges like, well, recent inflation figures. The standard 9-to-5 workday might seem familiar, but the average working week is actually surprisingly long compared to many European neighbors.
Over 42 hours, yeah.
We discussed important labor laws, that minimum of 24 days paid holiday, and the age-tiered minimum wage system.
Right.
We also touched on the roles of key organizations like the TUC for workers, the CBI for businesses, and the NFU for farmers.
The main representative bodies.
Exactly. And Brexit, driven by that complex mix of sovereignty, immigration, and legal concerns, continues to reshape the business landscape.
An ongoing factor, definitely.
And finally, navigating British business culture requires attention to politeness, punctuality, that nuanced communication style involving understatement.
Don't forget queuing.
Yes, and queuing, and the importance of formal written contracts. Hopefully this deep dive has given everyone listening a much clearer, more nuanced understanding, maybe offered those aha moments and helped cut through some potential information overload.
Indeed. And, it leads to a thought-provoking question, perhaps for our listeners to consider. Considering this ongoing evolution of the UK's relationship with the EU post-Brexit, coupled with its blend of sort of established traditions and evolving workplace norms, how might these unique factors shape the future path, the future opportunities and challenges for both domestic and international engagement within the British business world? It's definitely something to contemplate, isn't it, as the UK continues to, define its position in the global economic system.